In the darkest moments of life, when everything seems lost, sometimes a small light is enough to rekindle hope. Today's story is not only about loss, but also about a moving journey of a young man once abandoned, who thought he had nothing left to live for, until love unexpectedly came. Have you ever wondered if salvation could come from someone you would never expect? Let's explore his story, where a broken heart finds healing, and a lonely soul discovers a real home. Stay with me, for this story will touch your heart and make you reflect on second chances in life. When Lakota stepped into Sarah's small house, the whole space seemed to stand still. Each heavy step, carrying the pain of a man who had lost everything, echoed on the old wooden floor. His eyes, red and weary, stared straight at the walls, marked by the passage of time, as if he were searching for something lost long ago. The bloodstains on his body were not signs of war, but of emotional wounds, pains suppressed over many years. Sarah, sitting in the corner of the room, was unaware of Lakota's arrival. She stared at the pile of old belongings in the dimly lit room, a feeling of emptiness overwhelming her thoughts. It had been a long time since she lost her husband. Loneliness had become her closest companion, and each day passed like a chain of lifeless moments. In the rare moments she still felt alive, she could only care for the child in her arms, like a tiny miracle amidst the storm of sorrow. When Lakota opened the door and entered, the atmosphere was torn apart by his presence. She didn't understand why this man had come here, holding a child in his arms. The child didn't cry, but its eyes, like fragments of a shattered world, made Sarah's heart ache, not out of pity, but because she understood the pain this child must have endured, losses it had yet to fully comprehend. Sarah stood up, and her gaze met Lakota's. In his eyes, she saw weariness, despair, and an indescribable pain. He was not a stranger. He was a man who had fought with life, suffered, and lost, but still stood tall. She didn't need to ask where he came from or why he was holding the child. She felt that the answer wasn't necessary. His gaze spoke volumes. In that moment, they were strangers, yet seemed like old acquaintances, as if their pain had intertwined, creating a shared breath. Without much thought, Sarah moved closer and simply reached out to take the child. She didn't know why she did this, only that it felt right. As a mother, she knew she couldn't let this child suffer further loneliness. She held it in her arms, feeling the warmth of its tiny body, a feeling both familiar and strange at the same time. The child was not hers, but it needed her, and she needed it. Lakota stood silently, gazing at Sarah with a quiet gratitude. He couldn't express what he felt, because words had long lost their meaning. But in his heart, he sensed something miraculous. He had entered this house believing there was nowhere left for him to go, but now, he realized this house could be where he would stay. Not because it was a perfect home, but because it held something he had never had: love and acceptance. The hours that followed passed quietly. Sarah cared for the child, changed its diaper, fed it, and rocked it to sleep. These simple actions, which she had done with her husband, now took on a different meaning. She no longer felt alone. The loneliness that had plagued her for so long seemed to fade, replaced by a new hope. She looked at Lakota, and in his eyes she saw a man longing for a different life, a life free from wounds and long nights of solitude. Lakota didn't say much. He simply observed Sarah and the child, as if searching for something to hold on to. His life before had been nothing but battles, long days on the battlefield, and quiet nights with no one by his side. He had once dreamed of a home, but those dreams had been crushed by war and sorrow. But now, in this simple room, he felt a glimmer of light. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he sensed that this was a place where he could find peace. While caring for the child, Sarah began to feel something she had never expected. She looked at the child in her arms, feeling love without reason, without expectation, just simple, unconditional love. She looked at Lakota and realized that, though he was a stranger, they were sharing something special, a bond between two lonely souls. She no longer felt like a woman who had lost everything. She felt like a mother, a woman who could give love and care, and more importantly, she realized that she could heal the wounds of others. The meeting between Lakota and Sarah wasn't a coincidence. It was the intersection of paths, where two wounded hearts found each other. When these two people met, it wasn't a romantic love story from a novel. It was a story of healing, of a woman who had lost everything but could still open her heart to accept, and a man who had fallen into despair but found salvation in care and concern. At this moment, when Lakota and Sarah looked at each other, they didn't say a word, but everything was clear. They had found each other. They had found a home, not made of walls, but of hearts that knew how to share. They knew that, despite all the loss, they could begin again from here. And from that moment on, their lives would no longer be lonely. Since the moment Lakota stepped into Sarah's house, the connection between them didn't come immediately, but gradually formed in the silence of the hours. From the moment he placed the child in Sarah's hands, a subtle change began to spark. It wasn't love right away, but a silent understanding, a deep connection neither of them could put into words. Every small action, every glance, every gesture seemed to contain a silent message only hearts willing to open could perceive. Sarah, though she had always kept herself wrapped in the shell of loneliness, began to feel a change within herself. She had lived in the pain of losing her husband for so long that her heart had closed off. But when she looked into Lakota's eyes, she realized something strange. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He wasn't just a man carrying wounds, but a person, a heart in need of healing. She looked at him and saw a strange resemblance between them. Both were people who had been hurt, but it was because of that pain that they understood each other in a way no one else could. As the night fell and the fire in the stove burned brightly, Sarah began to carefully tend to the child. Simple tasks like changing its diaper or feeding it now became acts filled with love. Each time she gently held the child in her arms, she wasn't just a mother caring for her child, but a woman beginning again. The child wasn't just a new life. It was an opportunity for her to rediscover joy in life, to feel the love she had forgotten. Lakota, after many days of living in solitude, finally felt the warmth in this house. He wasn't a man who easily expressed his feelings, but inside him, change was slowly taking place. The feeling of being cared for, of being noticed, even in small ways, made his heart stir. He had never imagined finding hope in a strange woman, but now, looking at Sarah, he realized that love could come from places he least expected. As the days passed, the connection between them grew stronger. Sarah didn't just care for the child. She began to pay more attention to Lakota. She started noticing that he wasn't just a stranger, but a man with deep wounds, someone who needed help. What warmed her heart, though, was that he never asked for anything from her. He simply stayed there, silently, not expecting salvation, but finding healing in her presence. Lakota, though still carrying many unspoken pains, couldn't ignore the changes within himself. He no longer felt like a warrior lost in the world. He was a man capable of loving and being loved. He wasn't a savior, but he was no longer a man cast aside by the world. He began to notice the simple things in life, moments he had never paid attention to before. Sarah's laughter as she stroked the child, her gentle gaze whenever she looked at him, and the meals she cooked, full of love. One evening, as the dim light of the oil lamp flickered in the room, Sarah and Lakota sat side by the fire. Neither said much, but the silence didn't make them feel distant. They didn't need words to understand each other. They both knew that, in this moment, they had found what they both lacked: comfort, empathy, and most importantly, love. Lakota looked at Sarah, feeling the warmth of her presence, and within him, a strange sensation arose. He wasn't a man who easily let his heart show, but he couldn't deny this truth. He was no longer alone. Sarah had helped him heal the wounds in his heart, not with words, but with actions. She didn't expect him to change, didn't demand he speak his feelings. She was simply a woman willing to love and care, and that was enough. At the same time, Sarah realized that she had started seeing Lakota differently. He was no longer the stranger she had met on a night filled with blood and pain. He was a strong man, but also very vulnerable. And through the days spent together, she saw in him a silent love, a sacrifice that didn't need to be spoken. He didn't expect her to do anything for him, but every action, every glance, carried gratitude and sincere affection. Their connection wasn't a conventional love story. It wasn't a romance that blossomed at first sight. It was a healing story, a long journey of rediscovering themselves. And with each passing day, the love between Sarah and Lakota grew, not from promises, but from sharing, care, and deep understanding for one another. As time continued, Sarah and Lakota were no longer strangers. They had become an inseparable part of each other's lives. And most importantly, they had not only found each other in a simple house, but had found a true home, a place where love and understanding could heal all wounds. Since the emotional bonds between Lakota and Sarah began to form, their lives were no longer just about surviving. A delicate yet powerful transformation had begun within them. Neither of them realized that the small acts, the silent moments, and the unspoken love were creating a miracle they had never dared to dream of, the rebirth of a person and the creation of a new family. Lakota wasn't an easy man to change. He came from a past full of pain, a warrior who had faced battles not just with enemies but with himself. He had once believed that love was a distant thing, that loneliness and pain were the rewards life gave to those who survived war. But since stepping into Sarah's small house, he had realized a painful but beautiful truth. Healing could come from places he had never expected. In the early days, Lakota didn't know how to repay Sarah. He wasn't someone who was good at expressing gratitude, and he had no material gifts to offer. But he had something he had never thought of: the power of silence, patience, and a heart willing to love. He began helping Sarah with small tasks around the house, fixing old items, repairing parts of the house that time had damaged. These weren't heroic gestures, but to Sarah, they meant everything. Lakota wasn't just a man fixing her house. He was helping her heal the heart, worn down by the pain of losing her husband. These days had opened a new door in his heart, a door he had never dared imagine. For Sarah, she noticed a miracle happening in her life. After losing her husband, she had lived in the darkness of the past, without hope or belief in the future. But the presence of Lakota and the child had changed everything. She felt love in the small actions, from preparing meals with him to the quiet evenings sitting together. These loving gestures, the words that didn't need to be spoken, made her heart bloom once again. She realized that, although she had lost everything, she had now found a reason to live, a reason to smile and love. And then, one day, when autumn arrived and the sunlight gently streamed through the window, Sarah sat by the fire, looking at the child sleeping soundly. Lakota stood by the window, his gaze distant, as if he were deep in thought. Sarah looked at him and sensed a change. Lakota was no longer the man who carried the deepest pain and loneliness. He had begun to open his heart, beginning to realize that love was not just something to give, but also something to receive. He wasn't just the protector of Sarah and the child. He had found faith in a new life. At the same time, Sarah began to see herself more clearly. She was no longer the weak woman drowning in pain and loss. She was a mother, a wife, and a woman strong enough to stand tall in a world full of hardships. Sarah looked at Lakota and realized that together they had built something precious, a home. Not a perfect house, but a place where they could love each other, support one another, and start over from scratch. She saw a rebirth in herself, a change not from the outside, but from deep within her heart. The rebirth of Lakota and Sarah was not a simple story of finding love after loss. It was a story of healing, about how love could recreate a person. Lakota, the man once full of wounds, had found salvation not from victories on the battlefield, but from the simple things in everyday life. Sarah, the woman who had once lost all faith in life, had now regained hope and strength from the love she had given and received from Lakota. Their love wasn't an ideal romance, but it was real love, built from everyday actions, from sharing and caring for one another. They didn't need to speak much about their feelings. Their understanding and care spoke volumes. Lakota didn't need to become Sarah's hero, and Sarah didn't need to save Lakota. They just needed a place where they could love and feel at peace. Their story wasn't just about finding love after pain, but about the rebirth of a family, a new beginning. Lakota hadn't just found a woman to love. He had found a home, a place where he could be himself, not a warrior, not a guru soul, but a man who could love and be loved. Sarah, once a woman who had been broken, had become a source of strength, not only for herself, but also for Lakota and the child. Together they created a new family, not with ideal promises, but with true love, love that could overcome any obstacle. Every day, they no longer just existed but truly lived, not because of promises or lofty ideals, but because they had found something more important than anything else, peace in their hearts, and a home to return to. Lakota's rebirth wasn't just physical recovery, but a complete shift in how he saw life. He was no longer the lonely and wounded man. He was a man who had found himself again, and more importantly, he had found a family and real love. When Lakota looked back at the time that had passed, he realized his life was no longer just battles between people, between life and death, but battles between loneliness and love, between existing and truly living. He had once thought that war and pain were inevitable parts of life, but now he understood that it was love, care, and sharing that was the strongest force that could help a person overcome any challenge. His life had been reborn, not through victories, but through relationships, through connections he had built with Sarah and the child. This was the most important lesson Lakota had learned. We don't always need to fight to reclaim what's lost. Sometimes, we just need to open our hearts to love and change. Sarah was no longer the lonely woman who lived in the memories of the past, in grief that couldn't be erased. She had healed not just the child, but herself. Her heart had opened again, and she realized that forgiveness and openness to love were the keys to finding peace. For a long time, she had confined herself to the wounds of the past, but when she decided to love Lakota and the child, she found herself again. The lesson Sarah learned was that only when we are ready to let go of the past, forgive, and embrace love, do we truly live, not just exist. Neither Lakota nor Sarah knew where their lives would lead. They didn't have grand plans for the future, didn't paint perfect pictures of life ahead. But what they had was deep empathy and a love that grew with each day. Their relationship wasn't perfection, but a journey of constant learning, changing, and sharing. And in those moments, they found the most precious thing, healing from their own hearts and a lasting connection with another. The rebirth of Lakota and Sarah wasn't just about physical or mental recovery. It was also about the rebirth of the core values they had forgotten during the long years of suffering. Love, patience, forgiveness, and courage weren't distant concepts. They were things that could be built day by day, hour by hour. They didn't need to do anything grand, but through small actions, they had built a new family. A family that not only existed but lived. A family that wasn't just a shelter but a place of love and healing. One profound lesson that Lakota and Sarah learned was that strength doesn't come from facing the world outside, but from facing oneself. Lakota had lived through many years of pain, but when he dared to confront the past and open his heart to love, he didn't just change his life, but also Sarah's life. Sarah, once a woman who thought she could never love again, now realized she could love and be loved fully. She had not only healed herself, but had also given Lakota a real home. The truth that love can heal is not just a saying, but a reality they proved through their actions. Their relationship wasn't perfect, and that's the message their story wants to convey. Life doesn't always go according to plan, and people aren't always heroes or ideal models. However, it is precisely the flaws, the imperfections, and the not-perfectness that make the relationship between Lakota and Sarah so real and precious. They didn't need to be perfect, they just needed to be themselves, and that was enough to create a happy family. The message of forgiveness and patience is also an important part of their lesson. Both Lakota and Sarah carried wounds that couldn't easily be erased. Lakota had to learn to forgive himself, so he no longer had to be tortured by the mistakes of the past. Sarah also had to learn to forgive what had happened in her life, and most importantly, she had to learn to love again after experiencing such a great loss. This forgiveness, not only toward others but also towards themselves, helped them find peace in their hearts and open the door to a new life. Nothing is permanent in this life. Loved ones can leave, opportunities can pass, and pain can linger. But the only thing we can control is how we live and love in each moment. Lakota and Sarah taught us that life isn't always fair, but we can create fairness in our lives by opening our hearts, loving, and being patient. The most important lesson they leave behind is that it's never too late to change, to love, and to begin again. Finally, the message that Lakota and Sarah's story brings is: love is the strongest force, capable of changing a person, healing wounds, and creating a new family. A family is not built from walls or material things, but from loving hearts, from small yet sincere actions. It was love that helped them find peace, a rebirth in their souls, and most importantly, a home to return to. The story of Lakota and Sarah isn't just a journey of loss and wounds, but a journey of healing and rebirth. It shows us that love doesn't always come from romantic moments, but can come from small yet sincere actions, from knowing how to share, forgive, and open our hearts. The wounds Lakota carried in his heart, the pain Sarah had to endure, were all soothed not through empty promises, but through tangible actions, through shared steps, and unconditional love. The biggest lesson this story conveys is that change is never too late, and love has the boundless power to heal the deepest wounds. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to love and accept imperfection in ourselves and others, and we can create lasting relationships that heal all pain. Lakota and Sarah have proven that only when we are willing to love and open our hearts can we build real homes, where love and forgiveness are the firm foundation. So, are you facing challenges in life? Can you see that love and forgiveness are the keys to opening the door to peace and happiness? Let this story remind you that love, no matter how small, can change your life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on other moving stories. Let us continue bringing deep messages about life, love, and healing. Share this story so someone else can also feel the power of love and forgiveness. Thank you for joining us on this journey.